At any rate, in the late 19th century, a global conversation started about what to do about the machines getting better, because there's sort of a stark choice. If the machines are really going to get so good that human labor isn't really needed, then a fellow named Karl Marx was precisely motivated by technology. We should remember that Marx was very much a philosopher of technology, very much thought in terms of it. And his point, to a degree, is that if the machines are really going to get better, at some point, you can't just say, well, all these people aren't needed, so we'll just have like a few, good nerds to run the machines and everybody else can starve. Instead, there just needs to be some sort of a system that doles things out equally. And the problem with that world is that it's just deadening and dull, and somebody has to decide what's good for you. And you can see this very plainly when Marx describes what would happen in his end game, his denouement. He describes this, there's this wonderful passage that's my favorite thing in Marx where he describes people lounging in beautiful lawns, practicing archery and reading the classics. And for me, classics okay, archery maybe not so much. And it's weird, but he's telling me what would be it's like a religion telling somebody what heaven should be. What if you don't want 72 virgins or whatever? Who are you to tell me what my ideal outcome would be? So that's a problem. Marx was only one of a large number of voices who were considering what to do about this. Another extraordinary one was H.G. Wells, who, one example is his novel, The Time Machine, in which the human species splits into two, those who still have something to do and those who are made obsolete by technology, and they diverge. And the interesting insight that Wells has, which there's a lot of things I'm not that enthused about with H.G. Wells, but I think he got something quite right about this, which is that both sides of the divide are degraded in their own ways, that nobody's really a winner in that scenario, and I'm sure that that's correct. I'm sure that's how it would be. And by the way, I think it's our normative path right now. I think we're on the path to the time machine outcome as things stand, but I'll get to that in a second. My favorite of the early writers on this, well, Mark Twain was wonderful on this stuff. I won't go into his perspective right now. E.M. Forster. How many people have read The Machine Stops? Okay, so you have an assignment. And by the way, you're going to be tested on this, and your grade is going to depend on you reading this thing soon. It's a short story. It's over 100 years old. I think it was written in 1909. I might be wrong about that. Maybe it was 07 or something. E.M. Forster, the same person who wrote, Room with a View and all of these novels that turn into sort of, well photographed and lit dramas on the screen. That same guy wrote this response to H.G. Wells, in which he essentially foresaw the internet as we know it. It included Facebook, it included Skype, it included all the stupid software breakdowns and the companies not knowing who's in charge. It included all the problems I talk about, well, not all of them, but it's kind of eerie. It's probably the most extraordinary act of prescience we have in the history of civilization or something. I mean, it's really worth reading. So that one is probably the jewel of the early literature on the internet before computers were invented. But at any rate, the thing about this 19th century conversation is it led us to this sort of, there was a lot of different ideas about how people and technology could relate as technology gets better, and there was only one outcome at the end of the day that really worked. And the outcome was a very interesting one. And it was never really stated explicitly, but it was that technologists had better create technologies that bring with them better jobs than the ones that are being made obsolete, or else this whole thing falls apart. So the descendants of the Luddites who smashed the looms ought to be able to get jobs as programmers programming looms, or as industrial designers designing beautiful looms, or as marketers marketing looms or something. So the idea is that when one kind of job gets obsolete because the machines get better, a new job comes along, and the new job is more cerebral, more based in the head and the heart rather than the back and the arms. You can live longer doing it. It has a bit more creativity, a bit more dignity, a bit more education, and all that. And so we've had this sequence of better jobs as machines get better. And in my opinion, it's the fact that technologists were able to keep our side of that social contract that has created at least a tolerable modern world. I believe, for instance, that the communist system would have won if we hadn't done that. And we'd be living in some sort of other sort of top-down regime. I think that that is the thing that allows you to have the churn in which things go obsolete, because we always have the faith that as a result things might get better. That's the thing that allows us to have the churn where some companies die, where cities die, Detroit dies, new cities are born, Silicon Valley grows, because people go there and they get not just jobs, but better jobs than the ones that were left behind. And indeed, at this point, in the developed world, we don't think of cities as places that are stuffed with factories and manual laborers, although they certainly are there. The manual laborers that are there are often working on the housing or the new fancy restaurants or something for the bulk of the people who are doing more intellectual or emotional, creative sorts of work. I suspect most of the people in this room are, publishing, design, education, something like that. And so this is the fruit of this social contract that has kept us going. Now, for the first time, quite recently, about 11 years ago, we've turned away from that social contract. And the way we turned away from it, in my view, is that we made, well, to put it bluntly, we made advertising the only legitimate business for information systems that touch people. So we entered into this new system, and it's a strange thing to talk about this because I'm criticizing this thing quite harshly, and yet I was there pretty much when it happened, and I know the person who made the transition. His name was Sergey Brin, and he's a great guy and a sweet guy, and there wasn't any bad intent, and there's no real villain here. I just think we've made sort of a pretty bad wrong turn. And so what happened was, because digital technology is becoming cheaper and cheaper because of Moore's law, it just got to the point where somebody finally said, oh, for God's sakes, let's just give this stuff away for advertising. Why are we even trying to charge for it? It's just too much work. And the problem with that, it makes sense from a lot of perspectives, but there's some perspectives from which it's really quite disastrous. The problem with that is that it suddenly meant that we're also deciding that the products of people's hearts and minds are also given away. And so now we've entered into this world in which, instead of walking down the sidewalk and suddenly subconsciously locking cognitions with someone else who might become your partner in writing a hit musical or whatever it might be, instead, you put a bunch of effort cumulatively into a sort of a self-promotion online with tweets and Facebook operations and what have you. And in exchange, well, what do you get in exchange? I think you get a bit of an illusion of a lot of benefits, but here I have to say something a little harsh. There's this funny thing that happens where somebody, like, let's just say somebody has 20,000 followers on one of these, or fans on one of these services. The problem is that that value can only be on relative terms. And there's so many other people with similar numbers of followers that it in fact is kind of canceled out. And so there's a way in which, by regimenting yourself into a database-like existence where you have like these, I am single, I have this many followers, I am this, by roboticizing yourself from a cyber point of view, you also put yourself into these categories with all these other people, so you lose relative advantage. Do you follow that? So that's, but then where the business is a very strange thing. A great many people keep presences on Facebook. It might seem to you like it's everybody, but it isn't.